Is just joining. Just to reiterate, we will not be live streaming this on YouTube or Facebook. This is just the recording for the church. Everybody who's online should be able to unmute yourselves at any time. We're just waiting for the video feed from the sanctuary, and then I believe we'll be able to get started. But for those of you who can hear us in the sanctuary, we ask that you please use the handheld mic. All right, I'm not sure who's typing us, but if you could share the video in the sanctuary, okay, there we go. And then let's test audio. But for everybody who's there in person, when you speak, if you could make sure to do it into a microphone, that'll allow all of us who are here at home to hear you.
Hello, text.
Yes,
Hello.
we can hear
Good
something.
Morning. Good morning.
We can hear you. If you can hear us. Can't hear you yet, Diana.
Not yet? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome. So I want to welcome you all to our first listening session of St. Margaret's Racial Justice Task Force. But first, let's open in prayer. So if you close your eyes. Almighty and eternal God, so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills, that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you. And then use us, we pray, as you will, and always to your glory and the welfare of your people. Through our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So welcome again, everyone, and welcome to the Racial Justice Task Force. I'm going to give an introduction and then essentially turn it over to Annika and to Jackie, who are our co-leads on the Racial Justice Task Force. I just want to give a really brief sort of background. The task force is the child of St. Margaret's Sacred Ground Project, which began over a year ago. And Sacred Ground, if you're not aware, is a course of 10 to 11 listening sessions in which small groups study and discuss the history of racism in the United States. Last March, everyone or most of the Sacred Ground participants came together in the sanctuary to share what we had learned and to talk about what we would like to go next, where this learning can take us, whether into deeper learning or into action. The task force was born of the desire to organize those thoughts, to allow us to put those thoughts into something concrete so that we can keep learning and acting as a parish toward racial justice. So as I said, our co-chairs are Annika and Jackie. And I also want to thank, I'm not sure if all of them are on here, but I think most of you are, Ann Yanamara, Helen Templin, I saw, there you are, the lady in white, John McCall, Maggie Jerry, Rhonda Williford, and Kathy Connolly, who, for their commitment to the work of racial justice. And so Annika will share slides and summarize our previous discussions. And then Jackie will explain the goals of the session and ask the first question. So this is really a listening session in which we'll ask questions And then we hope that you all respond freely and safely. And I just ask one or two things from that we've learned through our experience with Sacred Ground, and that is to let each person speak from their heart. And when you speak, to not respond to what that person said, but to respond with your own input, so that each person is safe in offering their thoughts on who and what and where we are in terms of racial justice at our church, and to listen to each person with respect and openness. Thank you. Annika, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited for today, so hopefully we'll be able to have a great conversation here. Not sure how many of you are in the sanctuary today, but as Diana mentioned, if you could, when you're speaking, please just make sure to use a mic so that we can hear you, and perhaps say your name first, because we can't actually see anyone in the sanctuary, so that'll just help us know who's providing that input in case we have a question or need clarification. But let me share a few slides. So we did meet previously, as Diana mentioned, the forum that was in March. And then we also met with the first initial kind of inaugural meeting for everybody who are graduates of the Sacred Ground program for the initial task force meeting. And with that, there were some additional priorities that were brought up. So let me do an actual share here. Can y'all see this okay? Online in the sanctuary? Okay. Let me know audibly if you cannot. But so what we wanted to do here is share a little bit about some of the priorities that were already part of the discernment process that Anne-Marie Jeffries, Diana, and Richard went through after that March session. This also includes some of the amazing ideas that came out of the first RJTF meeting, the Racial Justice Task Force. That's the acronym we're going with because everything needs an acronym. So we wanted to share with you in hopes that this might spark some ideas, but we also wanted to call out that these are some of the things that are already on our radar, so that way in the listening session today, you can share additional ideas and feedback. We will take all of this into account and prayerfully discern what the priorities will be for the task force in this next year, even outlining what the areas of focus will be in the years to come for the other task force members that will join after graduating from Sacred Ground as well. So I'll just go through these really quickly. One of these is a group that was already in motion, really, where they're researching the church's history of complicity and participation in racial injustice. And so really looking into the history of that. There is already a growing group that is looking into it. And so that is going to be one of the actions of the task force. Though everybody who's involved in that group may not necessarily be a part of the task force, they're still part of that ministry of doing that research and will provide regular updates to the task force so that we can continue to support their efforts. Another action is that there is going to be another round of Sacred Ground offered to people who were not able to complete it before. This would, of course, include vestry members who, as part of our service, we've made a commitment to all going through anti-racism training. And so we will open it up to the parish, to the vestry members who weren't able to do it the first time around, but that's another action. Third, we would like to do some sort of pilgrimage for learning and unlearning. So we talked about doing a few different options here. Some of this, of course, will depend on people's proximity to DC and availability, but we want this to be something in which there is ongoing learning and unlearning as part of the task force. Additionally, out of the Sacred Ground groups that we're meeting over the course of, I think it was 10 months, there is going to be a mutual learning discussion group that is led by Maggie Jerry. That group is going to be focused on just continued discussion, connection, encouragement, ideas, that type of thing. But it will not necessarily be task force oriented, but that is going to be something that comes out of the task force and that we will be supporting with everything that they need. Other ideas that came out of that initial meeting were looking at our vendors and potentially re-engaging specifically BIPOC-owned businesses for our bank, for flowers, for vendors, and we've had a number of advisors say that even if they are not part of the task force officially, they will aid us in making those decisions and going forward. So that's another action. We also want to be thinking about the race-related education to be year-round and not simply limited to a single month. So while it is extremely important that we have areas of focus and as you might recall, parts of the liturgy are even impacted by the focus for the month, but we want this to be a year-long effort, and we want this to not something be that's merely siloed to a single month. And so looking at ways that we can be expanding that and being more inclusive and aware of the racism that is existing within the liturgy to make sure that we are doing that year-round. We also would like to focus on voting rights advocacy, policy change, and voter registration. There's a lot of things that can go into that, so that'll be part of what the task force will discern in terms of actions. And finally, we are committing officially to communicating out on a regular basis to the parish the activities that the task force is focused on, updates, progress reports, that type of thing. So with the task force, if there are additional activities that aren't necessarily, not everybody who is doing that is part of the task force, we will ask for monthly updates from them of what has happened, what they plan to do, and what they need from the task force in terms of support. The task force commits to then in turn providing those updates to you all in the parish so that no matter what, you know what's going on and you can provide your input along the way. So those are some of the ideas, not necessarily all of them, but some of the major ideas that came out of that initial task force meeting. It does not mean that we'll be able to get to all of these in the first year, but we want, before we officially set our agenda, define roles and commit to deliverables of when we're going to be providing updates and the activities that we're going to be doing. We wanted to listen first to the full parish to understand what it is that you all have experienced, additional ideas that you might have. And so Jackie and I will be furiously writing down notes as you provide your input, but there is also a form. This is linked on the website. If you are in the sanctuary or if you're online, you can take a picture of this QR code and it'll open up the form. In a moment, I will also drop it into the chat, the link, so you have it easily accessible for those who are virtual. But if you are in person, you can access it by going to the St. Margaret's site, or if you'd like to, and depending on where you're sitting, you should still be able to take a picture of this slide of the QR code in here, and that'll open up the form. But you can submit anonymously there as well if there's anything that you don't feel comfortable with. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on these slides? Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Jackie to dive in.
Good afternoon, St. Margaret's. As Annika mentioned, I'm sorry, go lie down. Our dog is joining the discussion. As Annika mentioned, one of the important learnings that came out of our experience of being together in the On Sacred Ground curriculum is that the work of racial reconciliation and promoting racial justice was the work of our whole church. It's not a separate ministry. It's not something that the task force is going to do and then tell everyone else about. It is the work of the whole church, and frankly, it's a way of life. So as Annika mentioned, the form that you can access through the Connect calendar section of St. Margaret's website or through the QR code has 4 or 5 questions, and we're just going to address those same questions with you all today because we don't want to move forward with St. Margaret's work in racial justice without giving everyone in our congregation a chance to participate and make recommendations. So the first question is, are there any experiences, policies, or St. Margaret actions that have perpetuated racism and that you would like addressed?
This is Kim Johnston, for those of you online. I think we need to look at our music. I continue to be bothered by the spirituals that we do. Last week, we did one that was arranged by a white composer. We do the spirituals in dialect. They're written in dialect. Sometimes they're sung in dialect. If somebody spoke like that, we would be all over them. And I think we really need to start taking a hard look at some of the music that we're doing, because I think it helps perpetuate some of those stereotypes.
Thank you, Kim. Who else would like to give an idea or a comment? And Diana, maybe you can help us, since we can't see very clearly in the sanctuary, if there are other hands raised in the nave.
Well, I see Helen making movements.
Okay.
I wonder if you have something you wanted to say. And here, go ahead, because this is, but that's okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you would just like Kim to expand on what she was saying, like what we mean by.
If you look at, for example, the printed version, I don't know if any of you still have the your bulletin. If you look at the lyrics, for example, that were printed to be sung, there's a lot of dropped G's. For example, it becomes fallen instead of falling. There's a drop D in the and. So it's written in a dialect.
So do without the dialect.
Well, and I think with the spirituals, I think that I think it's something we just need to take a look at how we use them. We had actually talked about this in our group some, because I brought it up once before. So it's, I guess, my pet cause, I don't know. But the more I sing them, the more uneasy it makes me feel. When I see the way they're printed, when I see the way that we sing them and use them, it just is unsettling to me. And the more we do it, and I think the sacred ground helped me kind of put my finger on it a little bit more, but I'm uncomfortable with them when I see the way they're printed and when I hear the way we sing them.
Kim, are you saying they feel like cultural appropriation?
It does very much to me feel like cultural appropriation. And what?
And I was going to say also promoting stereotypes of uneducated, for lack of a better term. And so I think that also belittles.
So the language feels to you as if we're promoting a stereotype of way a certain group of people speaks. Okay.
And who was speaking, please? Tad, thank you. I thought so, but I wasn't sure.
Hi, this is Ron Lorenzen. I guess my thought is in relation to this first sort of follow-on bullet, when it says research church's history of participation in structures of racial injustice. Are we speaking specifically of St. Margaret's or the Episcopal Church or the Christian Church? And if it's first St. Margaret's, then it might be helpful to know a little bit more about what the work or the research has sort of unearthed so far, to have a better thought about how to address that in terms of how St. Margaret's goes forward. I don't know if that's a clear point, but.
No, I think that's a great point, and that will come up as we do our monthly updates on where the work is. So Farah had started that work, and then now John McCall is very interested in it. But I have to be honest, I don't know exactly what state it is, but it's beginning states. There are groups within our diocese, a group run by Peter Schell over at Calvary Church, which is helping parishes organize this kind of work as well. So we would be looking at St. Margaret's, but we might take, for instance, help or direction from other parishes who are doing the same kind of work. Other questions, really, anything goes. Questions online?
And everybody online, you should be able to unmute yourself. So feel free just to unmute yourself to share your thoughts, or raise your hand and I'm happy to unmute you.
Hi, this is Isabel. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yep.
I don't even know if my video's on, but anyway, you can hear my voice. I'm wondering, I'm new to this. I actually haven't participated in anything, so I apologize, but is there any kind of effort reaching out to folks in the DC area and informing them that, you know, we're trying to be a racial justice church, trying to continue in that tradition, and basically reaching out to people who are non-white. Is there any way that we're doing any kind of outreach in that regard? I have no idea, so I was just curious.
And we'll add that to the discussion. We won't be answering questions today so much as gathering your questions and recommendations.
And this is Anne, kind of following up on that. It seems to me we do have members of Charlie's Place, guests in our church.
Sanctuary?
Yes. I don't know if I can be heard, but I'm just thinking that a good opportunity to at least start some dialogue in our own backyard is the guests that come through Charlie's Place.
And who is speaking, please?
That was Anne. Well,
thank you.
So we have our second question is, what racial justice work do you want to see done in or among our parish activities? But before going on to that question, I just want to make sure that the first question, which was a really big question, a really sort of scary question, in addition to the songs that we sing, it asks, where do we see racism being perpetuated in our parish? It doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be an accusation. But we do want to make sure that whatever people are feeling or uncomfortable with, as we've already noted one, are there any other areas that you feel uncomfortable, that you feel that there is sort of racism that maybe we're not, maybe we're not aware of, or not everyone is aware of. And this can be said in a way of observation rather than accusation. So I just want to make sure that question has been answered before we move on to the next question.
And to emphasize what Diana is asking, the task force members realize that many of these questions may bring sensitive topics out, and people may be shy about addressing them in public, and that's why Annika created the form. So even if you filled it out before, feel free to go back during or after today's session and include other observations. And as Diana said, this is not a time of accusing. It's a time of observing and learning more about ourselves.
I noticed the church has made, oh, this is Rhonda Williford. I noticed the church has made a very valiant effort to revise the language of the service, that it's gender sensitive. And perhaps that needs to include racial sensitivity, because, for instance, I noticed in one of the scripture readings today that the use of the word slave was used. And I think it's considered proper now to say enslaved person. Wasn't talking about African Americans, but I think whatever the context, perhaps the same principle should be applied. I know that's a minor point, but I just thought I'd mention it.
It's not a minor point. Thank you. And did you all get that online? Jackie and? did you catch-
Certainly did. We certainly
Good.
did. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rhonda.
I'd like to just
think-
bring up.
Oh, go ahead. Ron has a
I-
question. A
Oh,
point.
sorry.
I just wanted to say that we've talked a lot about language, and that's important. But I'm thinking of an individual in particular several years ago, a Black woman who came to our congregation and tried to participate. She was someone who had been incarcerated. She had a lot of emotional challenges, and but she is a very intelligent person. And what I sensed from her was that St. Margaret's is good at talking the talk, but not walking the walk. I hesitate to raise that because I think in her particular circumstance, she was looking for direct help for her situation. And so one of the things I think we need to think about is how we be helpful to people, how we discern what the right orientation or focus should be in terms of individuals versus communities. Because I think
Yeah.
a lot of individuals suffer from a lot of challenges, but it becomes a racially driven conversation. And it was hard for me to sort of get to the heart of it with her. And she's since discontinued coming to St. Margaret's. Now, I'm not saying that she had the right perspective across the board, but I think it's something we need to think about.
So are you saying, Ron, that we responded to her first as a Black woman rather than as a woman who needed help?
You think I feel uncomfortable trying to speak for her.
Yeah.
But if I had to try, I think she would say that there was a lot of positive feedback to her as an individual and as a Black woman, but that we didn't meet her need. We didn't help her in trying to move to a life after incarceration and reintegrate into the community. I'm not saying that St. Margaret's has to help individuals in that way, but I think it creates difficult circumstances and questions to sort of sort through. But it's beyond language of liturgy. It's
Yes, got it.
sort of how it works on the street.
Thank you. I think we have Giselle has a point she'd like to make.
Thanks. Thank you for having this conversation. Something that you mentioned around the liturgy and around the music, I often reflect on the the bulletin, and I'm always sort of amazed and really excited and impressed to see how we use the bulletin every week to educate and to explain and to to help folks feel more connected to the service. And I wonder if we couldn't continue to use the bulletin as a place to do that. So, to your point about the today's song, the offertory, I noticed it as well. However, I listened to it in the context of the original and wording, and it was something that I can share personally, that while I did recognize it, it wasn't something that I really took to heart. It was sort of, oh, I see we're using the original language. But I do think that if we have a bulletin and we're using the money and the resources to print this, why can't we use that way to educate and explain? And even with the words, slave versus enslaved, I mean, I think we can find a way to do that. The other thing I will mention is that I came to St. Margaret's because a friend invited me. And, as much as I can, I will share my faith with my friends and invite them to come here. And sometimes it's less about wanting to sort of go out into the community and sort of bring new people in, and more about really taking a hard look at like who's in our network, in our friend circle, what's their faith, how do we, invite folks to come. I think that we both have to invite strangers, but then also take a hard look at the people in our lives to share the good news. So
you're in the last point, you're speaking to outreach. Whom do we ask?
yes, I think that was a question that, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Paige. And also Ann Yanamura, I believe, had a comment.
That was
Yes,
Giselle.
this is just something to be aware of, and I think it's something that is in the background of everything we've been talking about. The racial constitution of the St. Margaret's parish right now is predominantly white, and it is predominantly very good, well-meaning, well-intentioned people. But one of the things I felt conscious of throughout actually the Sacred Ground sessions is that it's very easy, given the socioeconomic and racial and educational background of many of the St. Margaret's parishioners, to fall into, I suppose it kind of is in the category of stereotypical or perhaps class-based thinking, but to fall into the mindset of being a savior to other people who need us. And I think that's something that we, especially given how our parish is constituted, it's not anybody's fault, it's just an observation, that we need to really watch out for that mindset in our what we perceive as our calls to action. We have to really, really stand humbly and at a level where we're not assuming that we what other people need and what we should offer. Just let that out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very important, Anne. Thank you. In the interest of time, Diana, we probably should move to question number 2.
Yeah, well, question number 2, and we've really been talking about that to a certain extent already. What racial justice work do you want to see done in or amidst our parish? So we've talked about some of our hymns. We've talked about some of the things we can do that are concrete. So now, though, stepping away entirely to the things that we're upset about, what are positive actions that you would like to see us doing as a parish as the work of racial justice? And or comment on the ones that we've listed. What's missing from that list? What do you really support on that list? And everyone here has it on their printout. Do you have a printout? Okay. I think Helen's giving a thumbs up to the,
Say is that we be mindful.
yes.
We're making an effort. Continue always to try and be focused on what's going on around us. That's quite frankly the best we can do.
I think Tad has something he'd like to say.
I'd point on the next to the last bullet, which is a really important one on focusing on voting right advocacy, policy change and registration. But that leaves out those people in our neighborhood and area that are not US citizens. So that might be something to consider.
This is perhaps a small point, but I did the Sacred Ground and found it very educational and stirring. But a lot of the material, understandably, was about the negative impact. And then I watched that film, Summer of Soul, and I thought, wow, that was so inspirational in a way. And I also remember Paige's session where she talked about the positive impact of sororities and fraternities. And so I think looking at that kind of thing would be, for me, helpful and celebratory, and just a different, remembering that this is a holistic thing, not just anyway, I hope I made myself clear.
Yeah, I think the distinction just to be, oh, and that was Barbara Usher, is not always focusing on what's been done to other races, but what is the power, the life, the culture that people bring. In Paige's case, she talked about sororities, and with her dad, she brought who was very involved in his fraternity. And gave us a wonderful story of that part of her experience of Black culture. Rhonda has a point.
Following up on that positive look, there is currently an exhibit at the Phillips of African-American artist Lou Stovall, who's he's still with us, fortunately. And during the 70s, he was very much involved in a lot of community activities relating to social justice. And I was surprised to see that St. Margaret's hosted several concerts and poetry readings, etc. during that time. And there's about five works of art, posters included in the exhibit that highlights St. Margaret's. And so I just wanted to point that out to everyone. You might go over there and look at those posters.
That would be part of our history as well. Thank you.
Hi, this is Penny Anderson. Looking at the list, I especially like the ones which are sort of outward facing. So there's the one about intentionally working with the vendors for flowers and other vendors. There's the one on voting rights advocacy. So I really like these things which show us taking very tangible steps that are working with others. I do think that when we think about things like voting rights advocacy, there's some lessons learned about all of the energy which has been poured out in the last few years on whether or not postcards to voters actually is effective in reaching its goals, or perhaps is very well-meaning but not as effectual. And I think there's different evidence. So I would say whatever I like the thought of us really trying to take actions that are going to materially affect others. But I think we also need to look at the evidence and make sure that what we're doing is in fact effective and not just something that feels good for ourselves, even though that is also important.
And was that Penny Anderson?
Yep.
Thank you.
So I think maybe now would be time to move on to our third question, Annika.
Yeah. So I know some of these do overlap, but we just wanted to make sure that we were thorough. So forgive us if we're repeating some of these things. But the third question is, in what ways could St. Margaret's pursue racial justice in our immediate community? So this could be actions done within the neighborhoods, with local organizations, that type of thing. But given that all of you are actively involved in numerous ways and in different industries, we invite your feedback for what you think St. Margaret's could be doing in the more immediate and local communities that would perpetuate racial justice.
Yeah, we may have covered a lot of them already. The other thing is we'll have several days to fill out the form online. So if you walk away from this discussion and then something pops up an hour from now, please go and use the QR code. I think Ron has something I'd like to say, but use the QR code or the link online to put in your suggestions.
Yes,
Ron.
please. Thank you, Diana.
So this is Ron. I was just going to say, in terms of community, I was thinking about this earlier in terms of some of the other questions, but I was struck by the fact that there was no mention on this list of partnering with other Episcopal churches. And I think of St. Luke's in particular, which is an historically Black church 6 blocks away from us. I don't know what the situation is there, whether they're not, readily inclined to work in partnership with others. We did a number of things with Church of the Epiphany and Glenna a year or two ago. So there's strength in numbers, and there's also learning that can be imparted by just interacting with these communities in ways that aren't so focused on a project, but might lead us to projects or other undertakings. So I would just put that out there as something to think about.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Any others in the sanctuary or online?
Yeah, we have one more.
Okay.
This is Kim Johnson, and I just had this thought as I was sitting here and we talk about community. And my question is, what community are we talking about? Because we have our immediate neighborhood, but a number of the people who even attend in person don't live in this neighborhood. And then thankfully, we have all of these people all around the country. So I think when we talk about community, I think we need to define that first to know what are we, because our community right now is the world. So.
Thank you. Anyone? Ron, I see you moving your head. I don't mean Ron, I mean Lou, sorry. You're both right next to me. Nothing, okay.
If there's anyone online too, I want to make sure we leave space for those of you who are joining virtually. Okay. Well, then I definitely don't want to hold it up since we've been able to cover some great ground. And you also have the form, of course, where you can provide that input later. But perhaps Jackie, oh, sorry, is there another one in the sanctuary?
This is Lou.
No, it is Lou. Good.
I have two quick things that I'll explore in more detail at home when I write it, better in writing. Number one, I watched with interest when the Pope apologized for all Christianity for how we treat the indigenous, how we treated the indigenous people. But he didn't apologize for the doctrine of discovery. I didn't know about the doctrine of discovery before I entered this course. And I think it's instructive for people to know that that's really the foundation of a lot of what we're dealing with today in terms of racial supremacy, white supremacy, and issues of that sort. So I want to make sure that that's part of the historical review, if we can do that. The doctrine of discovery that was issued by the church. And I think the church has miles to go to make up for that. Number two is the idea of the beloved community. I think the community is us.
Mhm.
And I lived in California for 10 years, and you can't go any place in California without seeing all different kinds of people and all different manners of dress, and all different sexual orientations in every gathering. And I've been in this church for, I don't know, 30 years, and the number of people of color in the church has actually declined in the period that I've been here. And if we're to be a community, we need to expand the table or the tent or whatever it is, because there are not, when people are at the table, then some of these issues can be resolved right there. That's all.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you, everyone. Unless there's anybody else in the sanctuary, Jackie, I'll hand it over to you for our final question for discussion.
Thank you, Annika. And again, our earlier items have covered a broader scope perhaps than the questions suggested. So we may have already addressed some of these things too, especially those of you who said we are the community. And as Kim said, the community is the whole world. But question 4 is, what are ways in which you think St. Margaret's could be better advocates for racial justice policy change? Are there existing groups we could perhaps support or join that are seeking justice on a national or global scale? And if I might add, this kind of goes back to what Ron Lorenzen mentioned a minute ago. In the first meeting of the task force, we did discuss at some length different partnerships that we might consider for St. Margaret's in this work. And so what I'm really asking right now is, what partnerships might you already be part of that you could recommend to the church to consider engaging in with others in the nation or in other countries?
Well, and I would also like to mention that the Episcopal Church itself has a number of organizations it's working with. So there is some use in seeking, to look to what is being done through the Episcopal Church One of the things that we forgot to mention, but that has been foundational in our organization of the tasks that we see before us, is looking at the Episcopal Church's structuring and conceptualization of beloved community. And there are 4 ways in which they have broken down how we act as beloved community. One of which is, how do we go out into the world? How do we look at a policy change? How do we look at the political structure of our country, rather than looking at within ourselves? So much of our thinking that we're doing is eventually to put each of these suggestions into one of the 4 categories as understood through beloved community. And we find there are resources there as well that the Episcopal Church has gathered as part of the work on beloved community. So just to sort of answer our own question, Jackie.
Thank you. But I think it's important for us all to hear those things that we've been discussing, and that we aren't going it alone as St. Margaret's. We're trying to tap into these vast resources. Also, Isabel online just recommended that we look at the partnerships of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington and the Diocese of Maryland too. Thank you, Isabel and Diana.
Are we still participating in helping financially with our doctor in Protección?
I don't know.
Yes. This is Hella.
This is Anne. When I went to Church of the Ascension in Silver Spring, that congregation was very involved in Action for Montgomery, which was a policy organization in Montgomery County. And they hosted the countywide meetings in the parish hall. They announced the meetings in the bulletin. And the church itself was very active in trying to increase the availability of low-income housing in the county. I have to say I'm not involved in housing issues in the district, but there's obviously, you just go to DuPont Circle and you see people living in tents. It seems like from a policy perspective, it would be something that would hook us to our community, but I'm not aware of the other organizations that do that in DC.
Thank you, Anne.
I recently became aware that at the, well, in terms of organizations that actually were formed by and are working on, actually they're formed by people of color to advance policies that will help to, if you want to say, level the playing field or improve the situation of justice for all. There is a lot going on out there. And what I'd like to suggest is that those of us who have connections to these organizations let St. Margaret's congregation know about events that are planned that are highly important. They are actions, they are also educational. And if I just can say, most recently, I became aware that there is a very strong movement now toward uniting Asian American groups who are generally, I mean, it's been country of origin based in a lot of cases because we do have different histories different times of immigration and different discriminatory issues that each group has faced. And so bringing that all together so that there's some critical mass there. I have also noticed that these groups have also recognized and absolutely advocate for a common cause with ethnically unrelated groups of people of color. So out in California, the Asian American coalitions are strongly advocating for reparations for African Americans. And those sorts of movements are not obvious, I think, to communities that are predominantly white. But what I'd like to see is, for example, my being able to say there is a rally on Saturday downtown for this Asian American coalition, because from the speeches and from the highly organized programs that are presented, people who do not belong to these ethnic groups would learn a huge amount.
Thank you, Anne. That's great. And I also noted your comment about reparations, and Isabel had suggested that we consider and research reparations issues too.
And our diocese is doing a lot with reparation issues. And again, Peter Schell in September is having a couple of online discussions regarding the Episcopal Diocese's work with reparations.
This may not be all that helpful, but just when you mentioned reparations, I spent quite a bit of time in Minneapolis last year and the year before because of the George Floyd killing, but and made some contacts in the Episcopal Church through Julie, and they are quite advanced, I think, on what they're doing with reparations in terms of within their own diocese, and they've actually started to get quite concrete about it. So it might be worth looking at that.
Thank you.
And I could tell that National Public Radio voice was Barbara Usher, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I'm thinking maybe we want to, it's in the interest of time and we're past 1 o'clock. Do we want to move on to summarizing?
I think that's a great idea. I would just encourage everyone, if you have other ideas that hit you later this week, to please fill out the online form. We'd love to get your input. So would my dog.
Everybody has an opinion. Yes, but we do welcome that. And so you can still access the form. It's not closing at any time. So as you think of something, please share that. Additionally, if you come across an organization or like some of the examples you've already provided, you're like, oh, this diocese is doing great work, that type of thing. If you could please email Jackie, Diana, or myself with that name or even a link, we are happy to do that research. It would just be so helpful that as you hear of things or you see of things, that you continue to let us know, just because there's going to be some things that are not on our radar. And to Kim's point earlier, our communities look a little different because we are from all over the country and our reach is now all over the globe. So as you see things or hear things, please let us know. And we want this to be an ongoing conversation. So in summary, both Jackie and I have been taking a lot of notes. We've also recorded the sessions that way we can go back to get any additional clarifications. But what we will do as next steps is there will be a second official meeting for the task force, where we will then look at all of these ideas and the pieces of input that you've provided. We will then prayerfully discern as a task force what we can immediately commit to and the deliverables on that and who will be doing what. We want this to be something that is very action oriented. And so we will focus, of course, on some of the things that can all happen concurrently. There's going to be some things that will take a little bit more time, but we want to start those efforts now. So we can't commit to doing every single thing that everybody has brought up because there are so many great ideas and this is a huge task. However, we are committed to moving forward. We want this to be the beginning of a journey. This is not the only activity either that the church will be doing and related to racial justice. And so we will take this away, compile all of our notes, and then finalize our mission statement, even including the key priorities that we will be focusing on in the next year, and then some of the future priorities that we may not be able to commit to because we want to be realistic and make sure that we're moving forward on some of these things, that we don't spread ourselves too thin. So those are the next steps. But if you do have ideas, please submit them to the form by the end of this week. We'll keep an eye on it beyond that, but I just want to make sure that if you do have something to add, we know that it's coming. So if you could please just provide your input to the sheet by the end of this week. Otherwise, feel free to email us and we'll make sure to continue to take input and thoughts and ideas as we move forward. So those are the immediate next steps, but we're committing to giving you updates in the meantime anyway too. So stay tuned on those. After our second meeting, we will make sure that you're aware of what we will be focusing on and the timelines for each of those items. Diana, I hand it over to you to close us out.
Thank you, Annika. And thank you everyone for coming. And thank you for those people who put themselves out there. I know it can be scary to talk about some of this stuff. So really thank you. And thank you online for everyone who contributed. So I want to close by asking you to close your eyes, to center yourselves in your seats. Take a breath in, filling up your heart, filling up your lungs. Release the anxieties that may have built up during this session. Breathe in hope. Breathe in thankfulness. Exhale fear and doubt. And then let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart, and especially the hearts of the people of this land, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease. That our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you and hear you.